Arts Cultural Center. Oh, yes, I want to talk about that one. The New School and Art Basel. They have collaborated with institutions such as San Francisco's Museum of Modern Art, Facebook, Museum of the African Diaspora, Counterpulse, and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, just to name a few. They hold an MFA from Mills College here in Oakland and are the recipients of the inaugural Nancy Cook Fellowship, the Murphy Cadogan Awards, the Defeo Award, and the Headlands Center for the Arts Graduate Fellowship. Yétundé, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's finally cooling off around here, at least in my neighborhood, so I'm not like dying of heat.
But, what neighborhood are you in? Because mine is blazing.
Really? I'm over in East. Are you still? Well, never mind.
Yes. I'm in the North Pole, and it does not feel cool over here at all.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, when I checked in with you last week, you were moving.
I was.
Is this moving out of your studio or?
Yeah. So, I like you said, I got my MFA from Mills. I just graduated. The ink is not dried on that diploma. I don't know where it is. But yes, we have this situation where, as like many schools, currently still operating during this pandemic, nobody's really able to go on campus. And so there's been a couple days where we've been able to go on campus and get items from our studios. It's really strange. The MFA studios are still intact, and many of us have a lot of our items still in there. So it's weird. I'm like in between this place of, I'm fortunate to have a studio, a small studio that I can make larger work in, which is what I've been doing recently. But I have the studio at the school, and then I'm going to be transitioning into working the studio at Headlands. And so I'm sort of in between, like I'm making a lot of work at my dining room table, which is fine, it's definitely changed and altered sort of what I've been working on right now. So yeah. Transitionary periods in between.
Yeah, that's a lot of transitions all at one time. That must be wild.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Headlands. Can you? I was going to save that for later, but can you talk about that now that you mentioned it?
Yeah, It's a residency. It's a residency out here in San Francisco in Sausalito, I think, technically. And yeah, I'm really fortunate and thankful that the committee, as well as the committee that was put together by Headlands, as well as the Headlands, not employees, but the people who do important work at Headlands also decided that they wanted me there. I'm going to be representing Mills as their MFA graduate, and Headlands has a graduate fellowship that's specific for graduate students who are coming out of local programs in the Bay Area. So it's open to quite a few schools, I think 6 or 7. So yeah, I'm really excited to start working on that. I've started doing research. That's mostly what I'm doing right now while in quarantine, because I don't know, as I mentioned, I'm having to be in my home a lot and working much smaller than I was able to work while at Mills. I'm really fortunate to be able to have gone to a school where I'm able to sort of explore size and be able to get bigger. That was one of my goals when going into grad school, is like making bigger work, making the work that I could never make in my bedroom, which was, I don't know if you know, but which was my studio previously. And so, yeah, having to transition from like making big work and trying to get bigger to now, like really, again, getting smaller has been interesting. But I've also been able to segue that sort of inclination to doing research for Headlands and for the projects that I want to get done there. So I'm excited for it. It doesn't start technically until I think August. But I think everybody's still trying to figure out how to be supportive of artists who need space and not like opportunity written on a piece of paper, but actually need space in order to create. So I think they're trying to figure out when people are going to move in and stuff like that.
So have your materials changed and your subject matter changed now that, I mean, I 100% understand being confined to a dining room table. So, you know, there's limitations with storage, with the materials that you can use. And then it's also, you know, a shared space with others. So like, how has your work changed as a result of being, you know, from this independent studio that you had all to yourself now to this, you know, in the middle of the house?
Well, I mean, a lot of my process in general is sort of starting small and then extrapolating on it and pulling it out and figuring out actions and performances that work with it, and then figuring out video that work with that. So I haven't had to like change too much of what I'm talking about, and I haven't had to change too much of my sort of flow as a creator, which is I'm very thankful, and I feel for people who are like consistently working big and not, you know what I mean? I understand that there's like a shift in that. Right now, what I'm doing is thinking a lot about a zine that I made earlier last year, I believe, and it also was a sort of ripoff of this initial work that I did for a show at Swim Gallery, where I am, for the past few years, I've been working very heavily with the Mammy archetype, thinking a lot about Mammy as an icon, as an object, a literal being that has been objectified, as well as a tool, and trying to figure out ways to transmute that energy around the archetype. So I've been doing a lot of work around erasure, and I know a lot of times when we as Black folks and as brown folks talk about erasure, we talk about it in this way that has to do with like minimizing pain. And I'm trying to think about it as a way that's maybe a gateway to something better, or a portal to something different, to a different solution, or a different end, or a beginning. And so a lot of what I've been doing is working with the sort of a lot of the objects that Mammy has inhabited or sort of been a part of. And I asked a while ago, a few months ago, for people to send me objects that had Mammy with it. You know, I've gotten a lot of like grocery store wooden peg things, and I've gotten a lot of books. And so one of the books I got is this pretty popular Black collectibles book. It's called Mammy and Her Friends. And the zine that I made was called How to Erase, where I essentially removed Mammy from these situations. And the action of removal and absence and presence is something that I think a lot about in my work. It stems or it stretches all the way into my performance work and sculptural work. And so what I've been doing is removing Mammy from every single one of these pages, obviously not from the cover just yet, but one of these pages, and really highlighting her absence and presence. I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do with this just yet. And I think that's one of the things that's been nice about being in quarantine, is that I'm not, the research that I'm doing doesn't feel so dire. One, because under the guise of an MFA program, right? But also two, I think it's, there's something that I'm glad I've been able to give myself, and I'm sure other people have been able to find. There's something about quarantine and having to be in this space that sort of dials down the urgency of making work, and I think really challenges us around notions of productivity. So I have no idea what I'm going to do with this, and I think that feels really freeing and liberating in itself, is not really adding expectation to it. But I really enjoy, let me try sharing this content really quick. But I really enjoy these moments where I have been able to see through all of the cutouts. And I'm going to share this one.
Oh yeah, I think I saw one on Instagram, your Instagram this week, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's interesting. There are moments where you can see through the entirety of the book almost. And I think that there's something really potent about that layering. There's something potent about seeing a figure missing. And there's also something interesting about, even though her figure is missing, you still understand the sort of echoes and ghostliness of what she represents and who she is. And I think even just looking at this image, maybe if somebody were coming to my work without having really known that I work with Mammy as an archetype, I feel like they would be able to glean some of that information just from this simple cutout. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in what she represents, even in her absence. So that's what I've been working on. I also have all of these really small and intense cutouts. So we'll see what happens with it, but that's what I've been doing. And it lends itself to being in the dining room.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the most fascinating and interesting things about you as an artist for me is your ability to work through so many, different forms of media. So, you mentioned sculpture, there's photography, there's performance. You're also a curator. I mean, you are just so multifaceted as an artist. And so, I'm just always interested in how, an artist that works with so many media, when you're approaching a project, it's like the cart and the horse kind of question. Like, do you pick the media like, oh, I'm going to work with paper this time? Or do you work with an idea? Or like, how does that come about for you?
No, that's a really good question. I think that is something, again, that I'm really thankful that I went to school for. It's definitely not something, you don't need to go to school if you don't want to. But I think it helped me personally figure out that a lot of the times, the most important thing to me is the actual basis of the concept of the work. And I usually focus on what I want someone to feel or how I want a certain element in the piece to be represented. And typically what ends up happening is I do this like small research that's very insular. A lot of the times my research involves my family. A lot of the times my research involves looking up creation stories and myths. And then I will write a lot. And then I'll think about, is this best as a performance? Is this best as a video? Is this best as a zine? Is this best as sort of a drawing or a painting? And then I'm able to extrapolate from that original sort of seed object and then pull out all of these different forms. And I think shifts in perspective is what is provided when you are able to shift a concept to a different material. And I think for me, shifting my perspective feels really important. It feels like that's one of the bases of my practice. So, for example, like my piece 10,000 Seconds for Nancy Green, and I don't know, I'll explain it, but essentially in 1893, there was this exposition called the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And it was one of those big like expos where millions of people come and they're unveiling all of this new stuff. I think Heinz and, like Hershey's chocolate were all doing big booths there, but also Aunt Jemima Pancakes were doing a booth there. And I came across this story because I was trying to figure out like, where did I actually first see Mammy? And this is where the whole entire piece began, where I was like, where was my first interaction with this character? Aside from like maybe some subconscious stuff that I haven't really processed, but what do I actually first remember? And I first remember Aunt Jemima, and I first remember Mammy Two Shoes from Tom and Jerry.
Oh yeah.
So Mammy Two Shoes from Tom and Jerry sort of is what catapulted me into this removing. The piece that I showed at Swim Gallery that I mentioned earlier was a piece where I removed her from a lot of her famous scenes in Tom and Jerry. And it was also started from this process of like, we've never seen Mammy Two Shoes' face. Like you never see her face in the cartoon. And so I was interested in that, like this sort of this anonymity, and also us as a culture, as a Western culture, being able to identify that is Mammy, even though we don't see her face, even though we don't see her whole entire image. So I started off with that idea, and I said, okay, like I want to research this. I want to understand where this icon came from, how it became so popular, and how it's still in stores right now using some of the same imagery. And so I came across Nancy Green and her story about the world, her involvement in being a sort of brand ambassador for Aunt Jemima pancakes. And it's rumored that she made upwards of 10,000 pancakes during the duration of the exposition for millions of people, right? And so I was like, okay, like what does that labor even feel like? They would also go on to the company, R.T. Davis Milling Company, which owned Aunt Jemima pancakes, would also go on to like sell out of all of their first sort of rounds of product that year. And every single one of those boxes had Nancy Green's face on it.
Oh, that's who that is. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you know, Aunt Jemima has been embodied, Mammy has been embodied by many people, but Aunt Jemima specifically was Edith Wilson, was the most popular one, which is the one with a big smile and and plump cheeks. And before her was Nancy Green. And, you know, I was also struck by the story of Nancy's family later on suing Quaker Oats Company, who now owns Aunt Jemima, for money and being dismissed, the case being dismissed. So I was thinking about that a lot. And so originally, you know, we're starting from cutouts, me cutting out Mammy Two Shoes out of the equation, out of the cartoon. And then I think about the actual person who is sort of a stand-in for Mammy Two Shoes in the real world. This is Nancy Green. And so then I think about how to create a performance or a piece in order to honor her. And, you know, originally I was like, okay, this can't necessarily be a 2D flat piece because there's so much more to her labor. Like she deserves so much more. And so then I was like, okay, then I feel like I have to make a memorial. Like I have to make a sort of landmark for her labor as best as I can as an individual. And so I started making this mountainous piece, which I guess I can share as well. I started making this piece called 10,000 Seconds for Nancy Green, where it was a big mound of plaster. I was thinking about how we, as a Western society, also typically create memorials. I think about plaster, I think about casting, I think about bronze. And so I made this memorial to her, and I was able to make it out of, I can't find this photo, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I made a large mound out of plaster, flour, baking soda, used aprons to actually create the basis of the mound. And then I was like, this in and of itself is not enough as a single object. Like I feel like I do me in order to actually create a sort of memorial to this person and their labor. I feel like I have to round this out by doing an action. I have to sacrifice some of my time and energy in order to actually make it sort of come full circle. And so then comes in the portion of a performance where I ended up, the mound itself had a lot of my own finger markings on the bottom of it because of me just having to like, you know, really pack on plaster and flour and all of these other materials. And so part of what I did is I scraped away, the performance was scraping away all of my fingerprints from this mound. And I did that for 10,000 seconds. And so this action, I feel like, was really what sort of made it come full circle for me as far as being a successful piece. And yeah, that's usually my train of thought. I don't know if that actually, that's my train of thought. Continually questioning, is it enough? Is it doing enough? Is it highlighting the right, is it giving the right intention? Is it highlighting the right work? Would this be something that, you know, if I were an ancestor, that I would feel connected to? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it seems like, it sounds to me like your work is always coming from this place of research and exploring and finding more, and then that leads into whatever the final product is that we as your audience get to see, which is always stunning and beautiful and mind-boggling every single time. Yeah, no, I think that there's this way that your work embodies this emotion, this feeling, this memory that we all have. But you do it, you tend to do it without, well, sometimes you do it with words, but I was going to say you do it without words. There's a visual that really can stand alone. And I've seen lots of I'm thinking of video pieces where there's just a sound that conveys the meaning, or there's a color. And as an audience member, we get it, even though you're not, dumping whatever research you have, it still conveys, it still comes through somehow.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just kind of want to get the elephant out of the room. We're already like going down the path of talking about the Mammy. I don't know if you are okay with going down that path with me, but I feel like it's timely to just kind of talk about the Mammy piece and all of the history that went with that, and I think for me, I'll just say the first time that I saw that piece, it was in the context of Black Woman is God. And it was a standout showstopper piece that just blew my mind. Now, what I understand now, from just kind of following you, is that piece has had this history that has not always been respectful of you as a human, as a person. And so, I just kind of want to get in that. And it seems like the controversy around that piece, though, I think I think your intentionality behind it is around the Mammy and about the exploitation. And, and I remember you talking about relationships and how male gendered humans have throughout their history, kind of looked to you to be that motherly figure, at the cost of yourself. And somehow that seems like it's continuing through the work, even though that's not what your work is about. So, I just want to get into that.
No, yeah. I mean, okay, so I can't see like who's actually in here, but for those who don't know, I made a piece called Mammy. It was a diptych of 2 images. And it was first shown, I made that piece with the intention of showing it for Black Woman is God, which I think 2016, curated by Karen Senefru and Melora Green, sorry. And the 2 images are of myself. They're portraits of me breastfeeding a white masculine presenting person and a Black masculine presenting person. And I, have been at that point in time, I was thinking a lot about how Black femmes, Black women are often expected to be the vessel, the emotional holders of not only their own communities, but also the communities of their oppressors. And, this was at the beginning of me really sort of exploring the concept of Mammy. And I had made the piece out of sort of frustration, not only in recounting a lot of familial trauma around self-sacrifice and around unhealthy interactions with patriarchy and white supremacy, but also thinking about my own inclination in the world. Like I feel like I'm somebody who, especially when in relationship to cisgendered men, I feel like I often have a propensity to sort of continually give and think that it is something that's just innate and inherent in Black femininity and Black womanhood. And I think at that point, I was just like, I'm tired of doing this. I'm trying to make a piece that explains the sort of frustration of not only understanding that you might be a part of that continual problem, but also that you can see it generationally looking backwards. And you can also see how it is affirmed and sustained through the oppression of Black women and Black femmes. And so I made that piece, and I made it in 2016. It was shown a couple times that year. I think 2017, I showed the pieces once. And I think in 2018, I showed it once again. And I think that was my last time. I was like, I'm done. Because, I'm always hoping to make from a place of abundance and of, like, for me, a lot of the difficulty and also the challenge that feels good to overcome as being an artist is this risk factor, this vulnerability factor. Like, as an artist and as somebody who makes, you are constantly having to, and especially as a Black femme maker, you are constantly having to negotiate so many different, like, hurdles and so many different nuances that sometimes we can forget that are actually happening. But, like, when you actually sit and think about it, it's intense. And so throughout the years, that piece has been memed. That piece has been, like, posted on.
It's been memed.
It's been memed. Yeah, I remember somebody, I forget who, but a couple of people sent it to me and they were like, this is being memed. And I was like, well, and it got posted on Afropunk that year. That Black Woman is God came out, and I had to take a break from social media. It was really intense. A lot of people were, like, totally missing the point. Conceptually makes sense if you just see those images online. Like, it's kind of, I think if you're not coming at it from a artistic sensibility, if you don't really know what the context of it was, it could be an image that is easily memed. People were, like, making fun of my wig. It's just an interesting, it was interesting because I also think for me, when that stuff happens, it affirms my belief that this is a continual conversation, like the conversation that needs to happen. And clearly we're not protecting or thinking deeply about what Black women are continuously sacrificing in order to uphold their communities and make sure that they're doing all right. And I, on the other hand, because of how striking they are as images, I feel like a lot of people have started having conversations about the work. I know that my mom has seen the work, and I think that starts, she definitely was taken aback, first thought. Now they've been out for, like, a few years. I think she, we definitely have had that, those pieces have been sort of starting points in conversations with my mom and myself about self-sacrifice and the strong Black woman trope or archetype. And I think that was always my intention. And, there's also, like, the drama with, I was gonna say Brooke Candy, that's not Brooke Candy, Brooke Ashley.
Oh yeah, from your Medium article, yes.
Yeah, article. I don't know, I am, when I think about the pieces that Brooke Ashley made, on one hand, it's really hard for me because sometimes I feel like I'm able to, like, split myself and split my brain. And I'm really good at separating my feelings from, like, my brain logic. And for me, I'm good at that. And I feel like for me, sometimes I can see that perhaps if she had truly never seen my work, that this would have been truly maybe a transformative, transcendent experience for her, and really would have, maybe that is, like, really how she wanted to express herself. But the similarities in our work feels really uncanny. I think that even if we move beyond the uncanniness of the images, of the similarities in the images, the way that I was kind of handled through that conversation, and the way that that Brooke in those images was interacting with Black people made me feel really uncomfortable, right? And I also think made a lot of other people feel really uncomfortable.
I was one of them.
And I think also is a example of like blissful ignorance. I think I don't know. I think if I were a white artist right now, I would be really deeply considering like how I include Black folks in my work. If I were if I were a white gallerist, I would really be considering if somebody came to me, a white artist came to me with a Black person suckling from them, I would be like, hey, I want to bring up conversation. I want to bring up some conversations around chattel slavery and wet nurses. Like, I just want to think about it. Like there's a disconnect in the decision making process in that whole entire situation that feels like it's an echo. It feels like it's been something that's happening over and over and over again for decades,
centuries. Yeah, and I just want to say for folks who are not familiar, Yétundé wrote an article in Medium. You can see it on medium.com. It's entitled "Stolen or Not, Do Better." And it'll break down the whole situation for you. You have freedom to make your own choices. But I just know for me, the moment that I saw those images, so there's a white woman and she's suckling a Black male. And it immediately was just like, whoa, and then I thought for a second, I was like, wait, this looks really familiar to me, but the context is very different. A Black body performing this type of art has a very different reading than a white body performing that type of work. And, and there's so much history behind just that whole act and just going through the whole, going back to the 1400s with the dawn of the transatlantic slavery, it's just so steeped in so many centuries of history that for someone to pull it out, it doesn't resonate, and it just reads dirty. That's at least how I felt. But again, folks can make their own judgment calls. That's mine.
Yeah, no, and I nothing has happened. The gallery hasn't reached out. Brooke, I think, removed it from her website. She hasn't apologized. And I am trying to be about my peace right now. Trying to, like, you know what I mean? I'm trying to be well. I'm trying to, heal generations of intergenerational trauma. Like, I don't have time for Brooke Ashley and her work. But I do think that it opens up a conversation about gallery, like the responsibilities of a gallerist, the responsibilities of an institution. Clearly, like, not enough Black folks were in the room talking about this work. Like, I think about the amount of steps, because it's not just Brooke, it's all of the people between Brooke and the gallery and Brooke in the opening. And so I don't know.
Publicity, yeah. And then even the patrons. I think the people who rush out and buy that type of an art work. I think it just kind of also like kind of round it out. I don't know if you want to mention. I mean, we had a little bit of, I don't know if it was a troll. I don't know what it was, but I know enough people saw the comment that was made a couple of days ago. So it just kind of continues.
No, it continues, and I mean I don't post that work often, and I just this year, truly recent, like a few months ago, had decided to put it on my website. And for the longest time, I hadn't put it on my website because that piece really does, I don't know, it's a lot of like social media harm. I think that piece has both defined, I feel like sort of like started and defined and pushed out my career as an artist. But I also think that it's definitely like a sacrifice. Like, I definitely am sort of out there for this conversation to happen. I mean, the comment was, can I be in the next photo set, and I can't tell you how many times that comment has come up for me.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know. I think again, it just sort of reaffirms for me that this is a conversation that Black women's labor and like, um, you know, it just sort of affirms for me that it's a conversation that needs to continue. So that's why I
I
continue working.
100% agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about, enough of that topic.
Yeah.
I want to talk about family and how family, how family plays out through
Yeah.
your work.
Yeah.
I know you received, I believe it was a fellowship where you went to the Georgia Sea Islands with your mom.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Nancy Cook Fellowship. So I went to actually South Carolina.
South Carolina, okay.
I worked in Charleston. And the proposal was to go back to some of our ancestral lands. And I wasn't able to get access to it's a park preservation now, where our previous plantation space was. But I was able to go to the old home of our slave owner, William Aiken. And I went there with my mom, and I had a photography assistant. And we went to all of these different locations. We went to a couple of different islands, a couple of different wharfs that were specific spaces in which many, I think they said up to 60 to 70% of the enslaved Black folks came through that particular port in South Carolina. And it was a lot. It was intense. I think also I want to go back because I feel like I was only able to be there for a few days, and we were really trying to push out like, okay, we're going to these many locations. It was very, for me, it was very technical, and I want to be able to spend enough time to really remove myself from that brain and really like divine new work. But it was impactful. It was the first time that my mom and I had gone on a trip together in many years. So I think that there was that. And I think also being able to be there with just her and I originally wanted my grandma to come, but she was like, I can't. That place holds so many dark, evil memories for me that I have no desire to be back there. And I think I can understand that. Like the William Aiken House, which is one of the places we went to go take photos, is often used as a wedding ceremony, a place for wedding ceremonies. Like it's and I had to pretend on the phone like I was doing it, that I was an architecture student, that they would let me in, and I walk in with my mom and we have matching outfits on, and they were like, "What's going on?"
They're like, yeah, all white on top of it.
Like, what? No, I put on voice to do all that, but I really want to go back. I want to be able to redo those photos. They're really beautiful photos, but I also think that there are opportunities to really deepen my relationship to the makers there. I'm specifically thinking about sweetgrass basket weaving, and I thought a lot about interconnectivity and woven paths and stories while there. And so I'm hoping I can go back and deepen that relationship, get closer with some of the family we still have there. And yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes left of this conversation. I see that I have a couple of comments in the Q&A bar, but I want to invite everyone else. If you have a question, please put it into the Q&A. And in just a couple minutes, I will ask those questions for you. But yeah, I also before we get into that, I see, okay, cool. People are starting to write questions. But before we get into that, I also want to know about this residency. What did you have to propose anything? Because that's coming up. That's the next big thing for you, right?
The Headlands one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to propose some things. So right now, what I'm working on is I am working on creating a creation story and a death story for Mammy. I've been thinking a lot about myths and how, for me, a lot of the qualities of Mammy resemble a lot of deities, goddesses that I've come in contact with. And so I'm looking to give Mammy an honorable and like tender and beautiful death story that she can actually like go into with grace and dignity and beauty and sensuality, things that I feel like are so often denied to her as an archetype. And so a lot of what I've been doing right now is doing research, which is why I don't have like all of these beautiful images behind me, but I've been doing research. I've been reading a lot. I've been looking a lot into specific stories around Oshun, thinking about her being able to call water to herself. I've been thinking a lot about Oduduwa, which is sort of like rumored to be the first exalted king in Yoruba society, but there's a lot of question about whether it was a king or a queen. It's clear, and there's a lot of people who believe that it's more of like a more female energy or whatever female or male is. But I'm really interested in diving into those stories and using or working with them in order to create this story for Mammy. So that's what I'll be doing. I'm trying to think of whether or not I want to do a video for that, but the proposal that I created was making sculpture out of the sandstone and limestone deposits that are local to the Marin Headlands over there in Sausalito, and allowing them to deteriorate. I think a lot about how one of the main ways in which I feel like Black folks are oppressed is through commodification of labor, of our image, of our gifts and talents. And I'm thinking a lot about sculpture that can change, that can go back to where it came from, that can dissolve, that can undo itself and unfurl itself. And I equate that a lot with freedom and being able to change and move and sort of have a say, allow the materials to have a say in how they are put together and how they come undone. And I, again, equate that with agency and having a say in how you are represented. And I'm hoping that making sculpture that depicts the creation and death story through those materials will do her justice. And I'm excited about it.
I love that. It's such a beautiful way of doing it. You know, I mean, I think my first encounter with an art piece that included a Mammy figure was Betty Saar's The Liberation of Aunt Jemima. And, you know, I'm just like, wow, you know, and for folks who don't know, it's Aunt Jemima holding a shotgun. And, you know, it's like the Django version of how the Mammy gets liberated. And I love this like very healing way that you call it this beautiful death and putting the image away. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel, you know, Betsar, Renee Cox.
That's right, Renee.
They're all people who like ran so I can crawl. So
that's right.
I find myself in conversation with them a lot, and I also remind myself that the images that they made, including Faith Ringgold, I'm thinking of Faith Ringgold's Mammy piece as well. They're all in conversation. They were made during the 70s and 60s, right? Where it's the Black Panther Party, a lot of Black liberation efforts. And even still in that realm, Mammy is asked to take up for those communities instead of really focus on herself and her own personal liberation. And so I'm excited to think about her true liberation of herself rather than liberation for others, which I think Mammy is often always in service to. So
I love that. I love that. And yeah, I love that you're like, are there other artists besides those three that you find as your greatest sources of inspiration?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I'm so bad. So either Richard or Martin Poirier.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, which I forget. I'm so bad with names.
Martin, right?
Yes. So I went to Sullivanation, and I remember seeing that huge piece. I think so much about large sculptural pieces that are abstracted. And so that has been, his work has been really deeply ingrained in my mind right now, as far as like moving into the Headlands residency and thinking about how I'm going to represent these sort of points in the myths in a way that's abstracted and also allows people to project as well as receive from the sculptures.
Nice. So yeah, I got a question. The first question is if we can see some of your work. We did show a few pieces. Yétundé is in transition between spaces, so there's not a lot of work that we can show at this point. And then we also have questions.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I saw that Sade sent out to everyone your website.
I think
in
my
addition
Vimeo,
to the article.
Yeah, and I think my Vimeo is a good place to
the Vimeo. Oh my gosh, your video work.
To my first video that I did from 2016 that was shown at Oakland Museum of California is there.
That was in 2016?
Yes, I made that in 2016 and then they showed it in 2018. It was like 2 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm in deep transition right now. So
we understand everyone is right now. So, but none more than you. Sid wants to know, how did you present your final project for your MFA? Can you explore more about the content?
Yeah, so the MFA show has not happened yet, as well as the undergrad show has not happened yet. Is doing a lot of like online showing of work. And it's hard for me because my original idea for the thesis work was a video installation where I installed a bunch of screens. I was making a standing chandelier. I was like, welding and all that stuff. And now we're not able to be there and create that work. And so I definitely made a video that can be seen on my Vimeo. It's called Etre sans Sarah. And that means to be without Sarah. And I'm specifically working with and thinking about Sarah Bartman, the Hottentot Venus or the Black Venus, excuse me. And thinking about a particular 1815 illustration, a French illustration where she's shown standing on her soapbox and a bunch of French aristocrats are around her, clearly like exotifying her, lusting after her, clearly her being the source of her being objectified in that process. And again, I'm using erasure to remove her from that. And for the videos, I'm doing durational photography, which is essentially just a static shot of one single sort of point in the illustration. So if maybe you want to read me another question, maybe I can by the time.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, for sure. Our wonderful friend Rula Cycli wants to know. Yes, hi Rula. Thanks for sharing your time and practice with us, Yétundé. Rula's question goes to notions of production and expectation and navigating your graduate coursework and requirements, which is all still very fresh. How does that experience contrast to your current interest in quarantine of not meeting deadlines or producing creatively?
It's really healing for me, being able to remove myself from expectations of productivity. Feels like I'm able to actually dive into what I want to. Like I think the sort of research portion of what's happening right now is also personal research. Like, how do I feel making this work? I've been writing you've been writing letters too, Rula. I've been writing letters a lot. I've been exchanging with people who I had planned to work with creatively later on this year. And it's been freeing. I do like the sort of strictness that comes from being in school. And I find it, like, I personally think that I need a little bit of structure. And it's helpful for me, but I also can understand how it can be so daunting for people. It's like, there's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of sort of like having to manage your own desires with the expectations and desires of your faculty, of your cohort. So I'm really lucky that I got a great cohort that's down to just talk about whatever, and will give feedback on things that are not completely finished or fleshed out. And same with faculty. So yeah. I can help you for a second. I'm really trying hard to go. Oh my goodness.
SL Douglas wants to know, are you doing more videos like time travel? That was on view at OMCA, which, so gorgeous. And the interactivity with that piece, the invitation to participate. Sure. Also, they want to know, were you influenced by Carrie Mae Weems in making that piece?
Which piece?
Time travel.
I gave myself space to go back.
I gave myself to go. Yes.
Yeah. So I wasn't particularly inspired by Carrie Mae Weems making that piece. I think in general, I mean, right? Like, who is who is talking about Black womanhood or Black experience and doing, photographic processes, and who isn't inspired by Carrie Mae Weems? I think she is really one of the most amazing people at being able to turn internal research to external information and research, and do it in a way that feels so all-encompassing. I remember I went to, I think it was SF MoMA, and they had a show in the back where she did a video, and it was her doing like a minstrel show, and I forget the name of the piece, but I remember walking in and feeling like there's nothing else in the world that is happening outside of this room. And I think that inclination to have it be all-encompassing, having the work, giving people a lot of entry points to the work, feels like at baseline like a Carrie inspiration as far as my own personal work. And to answer the question about whether or not I'm making more videos like that, I think for me, that video came at a time where I was doing a lot of research about my family. And so I needed to make that work. I do think that my sort of like visual style for video has changed a bit, but I see myself going back to that, especially when doing this new piece about Mammy and her creation, myths and stories. Like, the colors in that video were beautiful. The overlays were beautiful. There was a lot of like really highlighting in between space and transitionary space, which I think is going to be necessary when making video work for this new body of work. So, yeah.
For me, that piece also just kind of conjures works by folks like, I mean, I don't want to say that your work is like someone else's, because it's not at all, but it also conjures the vibe and the presence of like a Colleen Smith type of video for me. Beautiful, lovely, Black, just, and there's a serenity and a peace to it. I don't know if that also, if Colleen is also an inspiration or a potential collaborator for you, because we've also got, I don't know if someone has the connect for that. Tana also wants to know, in thinking about 10,000 Seconds for Nancy Green, in particular, in this pursuit to resituate Mammy in certain tropes in a mythological context, do you feel like your work is working in any kind of a continuum or a dialogue with someone like Kara Walker?
Yeah, Yes. I think a lot of what I am most inspired by for Kara Walker, I remember her being able, that screaming machine in the middle of New Orleans. And her ability to balance this sense of terror that goes along with these like images of minstrel folk, and like really there's a sense of terror. So I'm thinking a lot of her cutouts specifically right now. And I do think that we're approaching similar topics in different ways is what I actually mean to say. Is I think that for me there's like a softness that I want to impart in these difficult conversations around Blackness and Black stereotype and mammy. And I think that softness is coming from a place of generosity rather than a place of terror. And I think both are necessary in order to get in. So, yeah.
I love that. I love the way you put that. I'm gonna ask two more questions.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I appreciate, this is Sia, I think. First and foremost, appreciate your story and energy you've shared as an artist who creates from a space that carries a lot of emotional labor of love and culture. How do you practice self-care for yourself and balance the personal self and the artist self?
Yeah. Balancing personal self and artist self. I don't think I have a very good separation of that. I think like it's all wrapped up. But I do think that I am getting a lot better at not placing expectations on my work as I'm starting to work on it. I think that that's one of the biggest boundaries that I have to force myself to make in order to make any of this work. And I think the way that I take care of myself is like probably the ways in which you all take care of yourself, which is like therapy and boundaries and being able to check out of the artistic process. For me, it's really hard. I feel like I wake up at like 3 a.m. and I'll write something down. And like, that's just how I am. But I also think I'm really good at being able to be like, cool, like I just want to hang out with my friends right now. I want to have a good conversation. I don't want to talk about artwork at all. I want to, you know what I mean? I think that sort of in line with my conversation around self-sacrifice for Black women, I realized that so many people in my family have gone the route of sacrificing themselves, their own well-being for other people or for their jobs or for capitalism. But I feel very strongly that generational curse sort of stops with me. And so for me, I really like am deep into my therapy. Like I take a lot of time for myself. I try not to get too hard on myself if I don't respond to an email in 3 days. Like, you know what I mean? It's very easy.
Giving yourself space to go back.
Therapy, like, and my mom told me a story the other day because we were doing the online graduation party thing. And she was like, ever since you were a kid, you've been very clear about your boundaries with people. And it was scary when you were a kid, but now I can see that it's something that you need. And so yeah, I think keeping boundaries, taking time to not talk about art, allowing myself the flexibility and giving myself the grace to be able to be okay with not being a perfect person, and constantly being in shift and change. And yeah.
I love it. Those are beautiful words for us to end our conversation with. Thank you so much for your time, your patience, your energy, bringing yourself. And I am so excited to see what you work on next.
Goodness, thank you. Thank you so much. No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say for guests, for participants, please make sure you check out the chat. There's lots of links in there. Also, to check out more of Yétundé's work. I also want to invite you to please come back next week and every week after that at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays for more conversations of In the Artist Studio. And Yétundé, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. And thanks everybody. Sorry I didn't have photos.
It's all good. We saw a couple of them, and you're so good at putting it out there for folks. So
yeah.
I think if folks follow the links, they'll see tons and tons of your work.
Cool. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, and you should check out the chat. There's a lot of affirmations for you in those.
Aw, thanks y'all. All right.
Well, you have a beautiful one. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.